former member of the Canadian Parliament, who we have talked to because he has been a champion for liberty in Canada. He was one of the loudest voices in support of the truckers' convoy up there just about, 2 months, I guess it's been now. Randy Hillier joining us again on AM 1420, The Answer. Mr. Hillier, good to have you back on our program here in the States. How are you, sir?
I am fine, and it's great to be on with you again, Bob.
But I would say that, this stuff is not settled here yet. This gun control is, what we're seeing is this continuous, relentless demand and appetite for governments and bureaucracy to control people. But it's not settled. They have taken another stab at it, and they're going to make it more difficult. But there is still much opposition to this. The hypocrisy and the contradictions on gun control. Well, it is all of those things. I agree with you. It is hypocritical, and there are a lot of contradictions. But when I said settled, I was just simply referring to his announcement that this is now law. What steps are there that can be taken to try to reverse that and restore some gun rights, at least for Canadian citizens?
So it hasn't become law yet. It still has to pass our Parliament. It's been enunciated. It will undoubtedly not come into effect until sometime this fall, at the earliest, I suspect, Bob. And I have no doubt that it will. But these laws are meant to be changed, and there is strong opposition. We're also seeing. We have never seen the increase in handgun sales in our country have just gone off the charts since that announcement as well, Bob. So, the marketplace is making decisions. People are making decisions. And you can hardly buy a handgun right now. They're flying off the shelves, and they're receiving such a premium because there is such a demand for them. So,
well, that's a familiar occurrence because that. And by the way, thank you for the clarification. I did present that as in when Trudeau announced it as if it was settled, not something that still has to go through Parliament. So my apologies, and thank you for the clarification. But what you're describing now is what happens here. We oftentimes refer to usually our Democratic presidents, and in this particular case with President Biden, as the very best handgun salesman in America. Because every time he and they open their mouths about banning guns, people flock to get them while they can before some crazy law is passed. So, tell me this, Mr. Hillier, and we really appreciate you coming on. What do Canadians say, generally speaking? What have you heard from Canadians when they see the number of mass shootings that are occurring down here in our country?
Well, I think it's the same as in the States, Bob. There is the Twitterverse commentary, and then there's the sober, reflective, and thinking commentary. We know that there is a problem for anybody to go out and intentionally kill others. There's something wrong with that person. Like that is, and to see what's going on. I think we have to realize that we have a cultural problem, not a gun problem. Like, we have very distorted views in our culture, and we're failing to recognize what those things are. Here in Canada, one of our major provinces, BC, last week decriminalized a significant number of hard drugs, everything from cocaine, heroin, fentanyl. And we know that drugs are often related with gun crime in various different... and here we are feeding fuel into our cultural problems, our societal problems, and saying, this is... We've got to get to the root of this. There are people with mental health problems. There's no question about that. I think a lot of what we're doing in our culture is exasperating those mental health problems. You mentioned earlier where push within our education system of confusing people about their gender and about their identity and not understanding if they're a man or a woman. Like, we can't be doing these really atrocious, egregious things and not expect that there's going to be substantial consequences to it.
We're talking with Randy Hillier. Mr. Hillier, I introduced you as former member of the Canadian Parliament, but that was only 3 months ago, I guess, in March, that you made the decision not to run for re-election. Why?
Well, last time we spoke about the truckers' convoy and my very outspoken support of freedom here in Canada. As a result of that, I now have I was detained and incarcerated. I have 9 criminal counts against me now for my actions there. But
still pending.
Really,
still pending.
I've come to realize, Bob, that politics can't solve what ails our society. Politics, culture leads politics, and we have to start fixing and working on our culture more than we have to work on our politics, in my view. So I'm focusing more of my attention now in speaking about the cultural problems rather than the partisan political goings-on.
Are those things you could not speak to from your position in Parliament?
Well, it's not that I couldn't. I think I can speak with greater clarity and more conciseness about what's going on than I can when I held elected office. And an elected office here is very different. It's somewhat different than it is in the States. We have a very rigid party discipline approach here, and I found myself in constant controversy and problems with my own political party because I won't accept that level of discipline. Mm-hmm. But we have to recognize that the people who are electing politicians, the people who are legitimizing our political system, they have a distorted view of what politics is going to do for them, and it's leading us to these significant problems in our society where, just like in Canada, many people in the United States wanted our governments to take away our freedoms. Okay? It wasn't government's fault so much as it was a lot of people actually were afraid of freedom. And I think we have to speak directly to people and say, why is it important to have not only freedom, but its underlying faith that is required as well?
That is an astounding statement, Mr. Hillier. We're talking with Randy Hillier. He's a former member of the Canadian Parliament. As he noted, we had him on during the trucker convoys as he was fighting for liberty for those truckers and for their families to be able to do their jobs without being forced to adhere to mandates, Canadian mandates, as it pertained to COVID and other things. That's an astounding thing that there are people there that fear freedom. But I'll ask you this. Do you believe, maybe I shouldn't say I'll ask it, I'm going to say it. I think that's happening here too, to a segment of our population, that I think there is a large portion of the leftist ideological side of our spectrum that fears freedom, that they don't want to be responsible for their own decisions and allow other people to be responsible for how they live. They really want to be controlled in some way. Is that what you're talking about that you see with Canadians?
Absolutely. There is, we have been conditioning our society, our cultures, and there's more and similar with Canadian and American culture than there are differences, Bob. Mm-hmm. Although there are some nuances and significant differences, but we share a great deal, and we can see this. I've traveled to the States often as well, and I'm a great consumer of American social commentary as well, and there is a large segment, I think it's a larger segment here than in the States, who absolutely are fearful of freedom, as well as not not even understanding what its value is. Okay, and that's they do not have the intellectual capacity to understand what value freedom provides them. Okay, and part of this, Bob, in my view, is that we have taken such a with the rejection of faith. Faith gives us the importance of the individual, the importance of self, and the majesty of your creation. When faith has been rejected and the collectivist approach has been adopted, there is no longer any value to life.
Well, I think you're spot on then when you talk about similarities between our countries, because that is exactly what we see and we talk about and say down here. The people who are of faith, who really do understand what their creation means, have a very, very different view of their freedom and a very, very different view of their country, and as it pertains to our culture, than those who lack faith and who don't really even believe they were created, that they just happened. And of course that I think that leaves a void in their lives. Let me ask you this last thing, just to kind of compare the countries. People ask me what kind of a country we are ideologically. I tell them we're a center-right country. We're not a right-wing extremist country. We're certainly not a progressive country. I think we are center-right and maybe a little bit more right from the standpoint of the majority. It's the very, very loud and vocal minority that has gone so far left, that has really kind of tipped the scales. It's really pushing people who are centrists over to the right just by pushback, basically, of what they're doing to our culture. That's how I would describe the states. We're center-right and becoming a little bit more right, although the left is very loud and vocal about it. How do you describe Canada?
Well, I don't know how I would describe it, because I don't see it as a left or right so much. I do accept your view there that there is a very loud and pronounced, predominant left voice. But what I'm seeing, what I've really seen more in the last 2+ years with COVID is we have a very timid, weak society. I think that's a better way of describing it, where people don't have they have even lost their grounding and their understanding of what left and right is. They don't understand the difference between individualism and collectivism, which is historically more the dividing line between left and right. But there, for many, many years, we have been encouraging people in our public education system and in our institutions, not to be men, not to be women. We use the term toxic masculinity for a long time. We have made our society very weak, timid, and cowardly, and they can be brought. They can be moved by political propaganda very easily. That's those are very strong similarities. Our society is doing the exact same thing in almost the exact same way. Randy Hillier, former member of the Canadian Parliament, is my guest. Last question for you, just in 30 seconds, circling back to the beginning, the top issue we discussed, which is the Canadian gun ban proposed by Trudeau. As you point out, it has to be voted on in Parliament. It would take effect in the fall if this does go forth. What's your prediction? Is it going to be approved, or will there be a sanitized version of it, or what do you think is going to happen? I'm not certain yet. Events play a lot in politics, and we've got some major events happening in our world, Bob. How these things are going to play out. One of the great contradictions of this is both your country and mine have been flooding Ukraine with far more significant firearms and weaponry than anything we're talking about as far as gun control. And a lot of it is unaccountable, unaccounted for. We know that a great deal of the gun crime, in this country at least, is done with illegal firearms already. We've had handgun registration since the 1930s here, Bob. So, but we don't have a lot of handgun crime. The crime that does get committed with it is from illegal handguns to begin with, or illegal firearms to begin with. We have about, as best I know, we have about 8 million firearms in the country, or maybe a little more than that. That's a lot of people and a lot of firearms who, like myself, use them lawfully, use them legally, use them for recreation, use them for hunting, use them to protect my property and my chickens if I need to.
Absolutely.
So how this is going to play out, I wouldn't. I don't have a crystal ball on this, but I think there's going to be. There will be such a plethora of handguns sold recently. I don't know how they're going to deal with it. I know that the Liberals, the controlling aspects of our administration, will continue to be relentless to control the population, though, and do everything in their power to eventually seize all those handguns.
A familiar story, unfortunately, on this side of that border as well. Mr. Hillier, I really appreciate you coming on and letting us know what's going on in Canada. We're watching very closely to see what your parliament does, because there is a population down here that wants to do the same thing. So we're going to be watching very closely, and we thank you so much for your time this morning.
It's been an absolute pleasure. You have a lovely day.
Thank you, sir. God bless.